Marcus Wellington considered himself above the common crowd. At 42 years old, he had built a successful tech consulting business and lived in an expensive London apartment overlooking Hyde Park. His tailored suits cost more than most people's monthly salary, and he made sure everyone knew it. Marcus had grown up in a working-class family in Manchester, but he had spent the last 20 years carefully crafting an image of wealth and sophistication that he believed separated him from ordinary people. On this particular Tuesday morning in October, Marcus had an important client meeting scheduled near Buckingham Palace. The client was a wealthy American businessman who was considering investing millions in Marcus's latest venture. This meeting could change everything for Marcus's company, potentially making him one of the most successful entrepreneurs in London's tech scene. Marcus had chosen his outfit carefully that morning. His navy blue Armani suit was perfectly pressed, his Italian leather shoes polished to a mirror shine, and his gold watch caught the autumn sunlight as he walked confidently down the mall. He carried himself with the swagger of someone who believed the world owed him respect simply because of his bank account. The meeting location was a prestigious club just off St. James's Street, and Marcus had planned to arrive 30 minutes early to compose himself and review his presentation one final time. He had been working on this deal for 6 months, and everything had to be perfect. The American investor had already shown interest, but Marcus knew that wealthy people expected to be impressed not just by business proposals, but by the entire experience of dealing with someone they perceived as their equal. As Marcus walked through the heart of London's Royal District, he couldn't help but feel a sense of ownership over the grand buildings and manicured streets around him. In his mind, his success had earned him the right to move through these spaces as if he belonged among the elite who had shaped this part of the city for centuries. The weather was crisp and clear, perfect for showing off his expensive coat and demonstrating his refined taste to anyone who might be watching. Marcus had always believed that appearances were everything in business, and he had spent considerable time and money cultivating an image that would open doors and command respect from the kind of people who could advance his career. Marcus's phone buzzed with a text message from his assistant, confirming that the client had arrived at the club early and was waiting in the private dining room they had reserved. This was perfect timing, Marcus thought. He could make his entrance at exactly the right moment, projecting confidence and control over every aspect of the situation. As he turned the corner near Buckingham Palace, Marcus noticed that there seemed to be more tourists than usual gathered along the street. He checked his expensive watch and realized that it was almost 11 o'clock. Something was happening, but Marcus was too focused on his upcoming meeting to pay much attention to the growing crowd of people with cameras and excited expressions. The crowd was beginning to thicken, and Marcus found himself having to navigate between groups of tourists who were positioning themselves along the sidewalk. He felt a flash of irritation at having to share the walkway with what he considered to be common sightseers, who probably couldn't afford to eat at the restaurants he frequented, or shop in the stores where he bought his clothes. Marcus's sense of entitlement had been growing stronger over the years as his business became more successful. He had started to believe that his wealth and status gave him certain privileges that ordinary people shouldn't expect to enjoy. In his mind, he had worked hard to elevate himself above the masses, and he deserved to be treated differently because of his achievements. The crowd continued to grow, and Marcus began to realize that whatever was happening might actually interfere with his carefully planned route to the meeting. He couldn't afford to be late, not when so much was riding on making the perfect first impression. The American investor was known for his punctuality and attention to detail, qualities that Marcus respected and tried to emulate in his own business dealings. Marcus pulled out his phone to check if there were any traffic alerts or public events that might explain the gathering crowd. As he scrolled through his apps, he became increasingly frustrated by the number of people who seemed to be settling in for some kind of extended wait. Didn't these people have jobs to go to or important business to conduct? The irony of Marcus's situation was completely lost on him. Here he was, a man who had spent years trying to distance himself from his humble beginnings, about to encounter a tradition that represented centuries of British heritage and protocol. The very system of royalty and ceremony that had helped create the exclusive world Marcus was so desperate to join was about to teach him a lesson in humility that he would never forget. As Marcus continued walking, checking his watch more frequently, now he remained completely unaware that he was about to stumble into one of the most well-choreographed and respected military traditions in the world. His focus on his own importance and his dismissive attitude toward the people around him had blinded him to the significance of what was about to unfold. The stage was set for a confrontation that would strip away Marcus's carefully constructed facade and expose him to the kind of public humiliation that no amount of money or status could shield him from. In just a few minutes, his sense of entitlement would collide head-on with a force that had been maintaining order and discipline for generations, long before Marcus Wellington had ever dreamed of wearing an expensive suit or closing million-dollar deals. Marcus was checking his phone for the third time in 5 minutes when he heard the sound that would change his entire day. The distant but unmistakable rhythm of military drums echoed off the stone buildings around Buckingham Palace. The crowd around him suddenly became more animated, with people pushing forward to get better positions along the street. "Excuse me," Marcus said sharply to a family of tourists who had moved in front of him. "I need to get through here." The father of the family looked at him with confusion and pointed down the street where the drumming was getting louder. "The changing of the guard is about to start," the man said with excitement. "You might want to wait a few minutes before trying to cross the street." Marcus felt his irritation spike. He didn't have a few minutes to waste watching some tourist attraction. His meeting was in 20 minutes, and he still needed to walk several blocks through increasingly crowded streets. The success of his entire business venture could depend on his punctuality, and he wasn't about to let a bunch of soldiers playing dress-up interfere with his plans. The drumming grew louder, and Marcus could now see the distinctive red uniforms and tall bearskin hats of the Queen's Guard approaching in the distance. The crowd pressed forward with anticipation, phones and cameras raised to capture the spectacle. Marcus found himself pushed back from the edge of the sidewalk as more people gathered to watch. This was exactly the kind of outdated pageantry that Marcus had always found irritating about British culture. All this ceremony and tradition seemed like a waste of time and resources that could be better spent on productive activities. In his mind, successful people like himself shouldn't have to organize their schedules around tourist attractions and military parades. Marcus decided he had waited long enough. The guards were still several hundred yards away, and he could easily cross the street and continue on his route without interfering with whatever performance they were putting on for the tourists. He had paid enough in taxes over the years to support this kind of government expense, so he certainly had the right to use public streets for his legitimate business purposes. Without waiting for the procession to pass, Marcus stepped off the curb and began walking directly across the street. Several tourists called out warnings to him, but he ignored them completely. These people didn't understand the pressure of real business deadlines or the importance of maintaining professional relationships with high-value clients. As Marcus reached the middle of the street, the sound of the approaching guards became much more prominent. The steady rhythm of their synchronized marching created an impressive wall of sound that echoed off the surrounding buildings. But Marcus was focused entirely on reaching the other side of the street and getting back on schedule for his crucial meeting. The Queen's Guard came around the corner in perfect formation, their red tunics and polished boots creating a striking visual display against the gray London pavement. These were not actors or performers, but highly trained soldiers from elite regiments with centuries of tradition behind them. They had been selected for this duty based on their discipline, their physical fitness, and their absolute commitment to following orders without deviation. Marcus was now directly in their path, but he assumed they would simply march around him or pause their little show until he had passed. After all, he wasn't trying to disrupt anything. He was just a businessman trying to get to an important meeting. Surely they could accommodate one person who had legitimate reasons for crossing the street. The guard continued their approach without slowing down or changing direction. Marcus began to realize that they weren't going to stop or alter their route to accommodate him. For the first time since stepping into the street, he felt a small flutter of uncertainty, but his pride and sense of entitlement prevented him from backing down or moving out of the way. "Hey," Marcus called out as the guards got closer. "I need to get through here. I have an important meeting." His voice carried clearly in the crisp autumn air, and several people in the crowd gasped at his boldness. The guards gave no indication that they had heard him. Their eyes remained fixed straight ahead, their expressions stern and unchanging, beneath their imposing bearskin hats. Their synchronized footsteps continued without missing a beat, creating a rhythmic sound that seemed to grow more ominous as they approached. Marcus stood his ground, believing that his expensive clothes and confident demeanor would eventually force the guards to acknowledge his presence and allow him to pass. He had spent years learning how to project authority in business situations, and he was confident that these soldiers would recognize his obvious importance and treat him with the respect he deserved. The crowd watched in fascination and growing alarm as this well-dressed businessman prepared to face down one of Britain's most disciplined military units. Some people began recording with their phones, sensing that they were about to witness something extraordinary. Others called out warnings to Marcus, but he was too focused on his confrontation with the approaching guards to pay attention to anyone else. Marcus raised his hand in a stopping gesture as the guards came within 20 feet of his position. "I said I need to get through," he announced loudly. "You can wait 30 seconds for me to cross the street." His voice carried a tone of command that had served him well in boardrooms and client meetings, but it seemed to have no effect whatsoever on the approaching soldiers. The lead guard was now close enough that Marcus could see the details of his uniform and the stern expression on his face beneath the massive bearskin hat. Marcus expected the soldier to call a halt, or at least slow down to negotiate a path around him. Instead, the guard's pace remained absolutely constant, his eyes never wavering from their forward focus. The moment of impact came with shocking suddenness. Marcus had been so confident that the guards would stop or acknowledge him that he was completely unprepared for what happened next. The lead guardsman, without breaking stride or changing expression, marched directly into Marcus with the full weight and momentum of his military training behind him. Marcus felt like he had been hit by a truck. The guard's shoulder connected with his chest, sending him stumbling backward with such force that his expensive briefcase flew from his hand and skittered across the pavement. His perfectly polished shoes lost their grip on the smooth street surface, and Marcus found himself windmilling his arms desperately to maintain his balance. The guard who had struck him never paused, never looked back, never acknowledged that anything had happened. He simply continued marching in perfect synchronization with his fellow soldiers, as if Marcus had been nothing more than a minor obstacle that had been efficiently removed from their path. The entire unit flowed past Marcus's position like water, around a rock, maintaining their precise formation and cadence. Marcus staggered several more steps before finally regaining his footing, his face flushed with shock and humiliation. The crowd that had gathered to watch the changing of the guard burst into spontaneous applause and laughter. Dozens of phones were pointed in his direction, capturing his disheveled appearance and obvious embarrassment for posterity. "Did you see that?" someone shouted from the sidewalk. "He just bounced right off him." "What did he think was going to happen?" another voice called out with amusement. Marcus's carefully styled hair was now mussed, his tie had been knocked askew, and there was a visible scuff mark on his expensive suit jacket, where the guard's brass buttons had made contact. But the damage to his physical appearance was nothing compared to the blow his ego had just received. For the first time in years, Marcus Wellington had encountered a situation where his money, his status, and his sense of entitlement meant absolutely nothing. The Queen's Guard had treated him exactly the same way they would treat any other obstacle in their path, with efficient and impersonal removal. There had been no negotiation, no recognition of his importance, no special treatment whatsoever. Marcus bent down to retrieve his briefcase, trying to ignore the continued laughter and commentary from the crowd. His hands were shaking slightly, as he attempted to straighten his clothes and restore some semblance of dignity to his appearance. The guards had already marched well past him, their red uniforms and bearskin hats disappearing around the next corner as they continued their ceremonial route. A young woman with an American accent called out from the sidewalk, "Sir, are you okay?" That looked like it hurt. Marcus wanted to disappear into the pavement. The concern in the woman's voice only made his humiliation more complete. He had gone from being a successful businessman commanding respect in London's financial district to being the object of pity from tourists who had just watched him get knocked down by a soldier who hadn't even acknowledged his existence. "I'm fine," Marcus muttered, though his voice lacked its usual confidence and authority. He brushed off his jacket and tried to restore his tie to its proper position, but his movements were hurried and clumsy. All he wanted now was to escape from the amused stares and pointing fingers of the crowd. But escape was not going to be easy. More people were arriving every minute to watch the ceremony, and Marcus found himself trapped in the middle of an increasingly dense crowd of tourists and locals. Everyone seemed to be talking about what they had just witnessed, and many were still holding up their phones to capture his continued embarrassment. "Look at this guy," someone said loudly enough for Marcus to hear. "He actually thought he could just walk through the Queen's Guard like they were going to move for him." "The entitlement is incredible," another voice added. "Like, who does that?" Marcus felt his face burning with shame and anger. These people didn't understand the pressure he was under or the importance of his meeting. They saw only a man who had been publicly humiliated, not a successful entrepreneur who had worked hard to build his reputation and his business. The worst part was that Marcus was beginning to realize the full scope of his mistake. The Queen's Guard wasn't just a tourist attraction or a ceremonial display. These were real soldiers from elite regiments, trained to follow orders without deviation and to maintain discipline under all circumstances. They had been performing this duty for centuries, long before Marcus had been born, and they would continue long after he was gone. Marcus checked his watch and felt a new wave of panic wash over him. The collision and its aftermath had cost him precious minutes, and he was now going to be late for his meeting. The American investor was expecting punctuality and professionalism, and Marcus was going to arrive looking disheveled and flustered, assuming he could get there at all through the growing crowd. He pulled out his phone to call his assistant, but his hands were still trembling from the adrenaline and embarrassment of the encounter. Several people nearby were openly staring at him, some still recording his every move. Marcus realized that videos of his collision with the guard were probably already being uploaded to social media, where they would be seen by thousands of people, possibly including his clients and business associates. The irony of the situation was becoming clearer by the minute. Marcus had spent years building a reputation as someone who commanded respect and got results through determination and confidence. But in a matter of seconds, he had been reduced to a figure of ridicule, someone whose sense of entitlement had led him to make a spectacular misjudgment that was now being documented and shared for the entertainment of strangers. As Marcus finally began pushing through the crowd toward his original destination, he could still hear people talking about what they had witnessed. The story was already taking on a life of its own, with details being added and embellished as it passed from one person to another. Marcus finally broke free from the crowd, but his ordeal was far from over. As he hurried down St. James's Street toward his meeting, he became increasingly aware of how disheveled he looked. His reflection in shop windows showed him a man whose carefully constructed image had been shattered in a matter of seconds. His hair was still messy despite his attempts to smooth it down. His tie remained crooked, and the scuff mark on his jacket seemed to grow more prominent with each step. Tequila, exclusive club where he was supposed to meet his potential investor, was just 2 blocks away, but Marcus felt like he was walking through a gauntlet. Every person he passed seemed to be looking at him with recognition or amusement. Had they seen what happened? Were they already sharing videos of his humiliation on their social media accounts? Marcus's phone began buzzing with notifications. Text messages, emails, and social media alerts were coming in rapid succession. His heart sank as he realized that footage of his encounter with the Queen's Guard was already spreading across the internet. Someone had captured the entire incident on video, and it was being shared, liked, and commented on by hundreds of people every minute. "Mr. Wellington knocked down by Queen's Guard," read one notification. Another said, "Entitled businessman gets reality check from British soldiers." The comments were even worse, filled with laughter, mockery, and criticism of his behavior. People were calling him arrogant, entitled, and clueless about British customs and military traditions. When Marcus finally arrived at the club, he was 15 minutes late and looking nothing like the polished professional he had planned to present to his potential investor. The doorman, dressed in a crisp uniform that somehow seemed more dignified than Marcus's expensive but now rumpled suit, gave him a concerned look. "Are you quite all right, sir?" the doorman asked with genuine concern. "You look as though you've had a rather trying morning." "I'm fine," Marcus replied through gritted teeth. "I'm here for a meeting with Mr. Harrison from Dallas. We're in the private dining room." The doorman nodded and directed Marcus to a discreet washroom where he could attempt to repair his appearance before facing his client. Marcus spent several minutes in front of the mirror, trying to undo the damage from his encounter with the guard, but no amount of hair smoothing or tie adjusting could completely restore the confident, successful image he had planned to project. When Marcus finally entered the private dining room, he found Mr. Harrison seated at an elegant table overlooking the club's garden. The American businessman was a tall, silver-haired man in his 60s who had built a fortune in oil and technology investments. He was known for his sharp eye for detail and his ability to read people's character within minutes of meeting them. "Marcus," Mr. Harrison said, rising to shake hands, "I was starting to wonder if you'd gotten lost in London traffic." His tone was friendly, but Marcus could see the man's eyes taking in his disheveled appearance with interest. "My apologies for being late," Marcus said, trying to project his usual confidence despite feeling anything but confident. "I encountered an unexpected situation with some military ceremony near Buckingham Palace." Mr. Harrison's eyebrows raised slightly. "Oh? The changing of the guard, perhaps? I've heard that can draw quite a crowd. Did you get caught up in the tourist masses?" Marcus felt his face flush again as he tried to formulate a response that wouldn't reveal the full extent of his embarrassment. But before he could answer, Mr. Harrison's phone buzzed with a notification. The older man glanced down at his screen and his expression changed from mild interest to barely suppressed amusement. "Well, this is interesting," Mr. Harrison said, turning his phone screen toward Marcus. "Someone just sent me a rather entertaining video from this morning's ceremony. Apparently, some businessman tried to walk through the Queen's Guard and got knocked down for his trouble." Marcus felt his stomach drop as he recognized his own face on Mr. Harrison's phone screen. The video showed the entire incident in crystal clear detail, from his arrogant gesture telling the guards to stop, to the moment of impact, to his stumbling retreat under the amused gaze of dozens of onlookers. "Extraordinary," Mr. Harrison continued, his Texas accent carrying a note of barely contained laughter. "The fellow actually seemed to think the guards would just step aside for him. Can you imagine that level of entitlement?" Marcus opened his mouth to speak, but no words came out. His carefully planned presentation, his months of preparation, his dreams of closing this $1 million deal, all of it was crumbling around him as he sat trapped in his chair, watching his potential investor enjoy a video of his public humiliation. "The comments on this video are something else," Mr. Harrison continued, scrolling through his phone. "People are calling this guy everything from clueless tourist to entitled rich boy. Someone even started a hashtag, #DarGuardgate. It's already trending on Twitter." Marcus finally found his voice. "Mr. Harrison, I can explain." "Explain what?" Mr. Harrison looked up from his phone with a puzzled expression. "Oh, Marcus, you look terrible. Almost like you've been—" He paused, looking more closely at Marcus's appearance, then back at his phone screen. "You don't mean to tell me that you're the fellow in this video?" The silence that followed was deafening. Marcus could hear the gentle clink of silverware from other tables in the club, the muffled sounds of London traffic through the windows, and the thunderous beating of his own heart. Everything he had worked for, everything he had planned, was hanging in the balance of this moment. "Yes," Marcus finally admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. "That was me." Mr. Harrison set down his phone and leaned back in his chair, studying Marcus with new interest. "Well, I'll be damned," he said slowly. "I've got to say, Marcus, this changes things considerably." Marcus felt his last hopes crashing down around him. The deal was dead, his reputation was in ruins, and videos of his humiliation were spreading across the internet for millions of people to see. In the space of one morning, he had gone from successful entrepreneur to viral internet joke, and there was no way to undo the damage that had been done. Mr. Harrison continued to study Marcus with an expression that was impossible to read. The silence stretched between them like a chasm, filled only by the distant sounds of the London club's refined atmosphere. Marcus felt sweat beading on his forehead despite the cool October air drifting through the nearby windows. "You know, Marcus," Mr. Harrison finally said, his Texas drawl slow and deliberate. "In my 40 years of business, I've learned that you can tell everything you need to know about a man by how he handles unexpected situations, how he treats people he thinks are beneath him, how he responds when the world doesn't bend to his will the way he expects it to." Marcus swallowed hard, knowing that nothing he could say would change what Mr. Harrison had just witnessed on that video. The evidence was right there on the phone screen. Marcus Wellington, successful entrepreneur, demanding that centuries-old military tradition step aside for his convenience. "I've been watching that video," Mr. Harrison continued, picking up his phone again. "And what strikes me isn't just that you walked into the path of the Queen's Guard. Hell, tourists make mistakes all the time. What bothers me is the attitude you displayed. The way you held up your hand like you expected those soldiers to stop their ceremonial duty because you had somewhere important to be." Marcus felt his carefully constructed world continuing to collapse around him. Every word Mr. Harrison spoke was like another nail in the coffin of his business dreams. But worse than losing the deal was the growing realization that maybe, just maybe, the older man was right about his attitude. "Those guards," Mr. Harrison said, "they're not actors putting on a show for tourists. They're real soldiers with real training and real discipline. They follow orders and maintain traditions that have been in place for longer than either of us has been alive. And you thought they should break that tradition because you had a business meeting." The weight of Marcus's mistake was beginning to settle on his shoulders like a heavy blanket. He had spent so many years believing that his success entitled him to special treatment that he had forgotten how to show basic respect for others, especially those he perceived as being there for his convenience. "Mr. Harrison," Marcus began, his voice cracking slightly, "I realize how this must look, but I can assure you that my business practices are—" "Stop right there," Mr. Harrison interrupted, holding up his hand. "This isn't about your business practices, son. This is about your character. And right now I'm seeing a man who thinks the world owes him something just because he's got money in his bank account." Marcus felt tears of frustration and shame threatening to spill from his eyes. Everything he had worked for, all the years of building his reputation and his company, were being destroyed by 30 seconds of arrogant behavior that had been captured on video for the world to see. "I've made my decision about the investment," Mr. Harrison said, reaching for his coat. "I won't be moving forward with your company, Marcus. Not because of your business plan, which actually has merit, but because I don't trust you to represent my interests with the kind of integrity and humility that real success requires." As Mr. Harrison stood to leave, Marcus felt compelled to make one last desperate attempt to salvage the situation. "Please, Mr. Harrison, don't let one mistake define everything I've built. I've worked so hard to get where I am. I've sacrificed everything for my business." Mr. Harrison paused at the door and turned back to face Marcus. "Maybe that's the problem. Right there, son. Maybe you've sacrificed too much, including the basic human decency that should guide how we treat other people. Success without character isn't success at all. It's just money with a hollow man behind it." After Mr. Harrison left, Marcus sat alone in the elegant dining room, staring at his untouched meal and trying to process what had just happened. His phone continued to buzz with notifications as the video of his encounter with the Queen's Guard spread across social media platforms. Each new alert felt like another blow to his already battered pride. Marcus pulled up the video on his own phone and watched himself from an outside perspective for the first time. What he saw made him physically sick to his stomach. The arrogant gesture, the expectant expression on his face, the way he had simply assumed that these disciplined soldiers would abandon their duty to accommodate his schedule. It all looked even worse than he remembered. But more troubling than his behavior in the video were the comments flooding in from people who had watched it. They weren't just laughing at his physical collision with the guard. They were expressing genuine disgust at his attitude, his sense of entitlement, and his apparent belief that his importance trumped centuries of military tradition. "This guy represents everything wrong with entitled rich people," one comment read. "No respect for anyone but himself." "Imagine being so self-absorbed that you think the Queen's Guard should stop their ceremony for you," wrote another viewer. "I hope this goes viral so this arrogant jerk learns some humility," added a third. Marcus realized that he was reading honest reactions from ordinary people who saw his behavior as a perfect example of everything they disliked about wealthy, privileged individuals who had lost touch with basic human decency. He wasn't just a man who had made a mistake. He had become a symbol of arrogance and entitlement that people loved to hate. As the afternoon wore on, Marcus remained in the club, unable to face returning to his office where his employees would certainly have seen the video by now. His assistant had sent several worried messages asking if he was all right and whether he needed anything. Even she had seen the footage of his humiliation. For the first time in years, Marcus was forced to confront the possibility that his success had come at a terrible cost. He had worked so hard to elevate himself above his working-class roots that he had forgotten the values his parents had tried to teach him about treating all people with respect and dignity. 3 months had passed since Marcus Wellington's encounter with the Queen's Guard, and the video of his humiliation had indeed become exactly what the commenters had hoped for. A viral sensation that taught him a lesson in humility he would never forget. The footage had been viewed over 2 million times, spawned countless memes, and even been featured on late-night talk shows as an example of entitled behavior getting its comeuppance. The immediate aftermath had been devastating. For Marcus's business, 3 major clients had terminated their contracts after seeing the video, citing concerns about his judgment and character. Several employees had left the company, embarrassed to be associated with someone who had become an internet laughing stock. Marcus's carefully built reputation in London's business community had crumbled almost overnight. But as painful as those first few weeks had been, something unexpected began to happen. As Marcus sat in his apartment forced to confront his behavior and its consequences, he started to remember the man he had been before money and status became his primary concerns. He thought about his parents, who had worked multiple jobs to support their family but never lost their kindness or respect for others. He recalled his younger self, who had been driven by a genuine desire to build something meaningful rather than just to prove his superiority over others. The turning point came when Marcus decided to do something he had never done before. He issued a public apology. Not a carefully crafted statement designed to protect his image, but a genuine acknowledgement of his mistakes and the attitude that had led to them. "I want to apologize to the Queen's Guard, to the people who witnessed my behavior, and to everyone who was offended by the arrogance and entitlement I displayed," Marcus wrote in a heartfelt post on his company's social media accounts. "I was wrong to think that my business meeting was more important than centuries of military tradition. I was wrong to treat those dedicated soldiers as if they were obstacles to be pushed aside. And I was wrong to carry myself through the world as if my success gave me the right to demand special treatment from others." The response to his apology was mixed, but something in its sincerity seemed to resonate with many people. Marcus began receiving messages from individuals who appreciated his willingness to acknowledge his mistakes and learn from them. Some shared their own stories of moments when success or stress had caused them to lose sight of what really mattered. Marcus decided to use this experience as a catalyst for real change. He began volunteering at a local charity that helped unemployed individuals develop job skills and find work. Many of the people he worked with reminded him of his own parents, hard-working, decent people who simply needed an opportunity to improve their circumstances. Working with these individuals gave Marcus a new perspective on success and failure. He met single mothers juggling multiple jobs to support their children, older workers who had been displaced by technological changes, and young people from disadvantaged backgrounds who were fighting to build better lives for themselves. Their struggles and determination reminded him of qualities he had forgotten in his pursuit of wealth and status. Marcus also began to rebuild his business, but with a different approach. Instead of focusing solely on profit and prestige, he started looking for ways his company could create genuine value for clients, while also providing meaningful opportunities for employees. He implemented profit-sharing programs, offered flexible work arrangements for parents, and began partnering with local schools to provide internships for students from low-income families. The changes weren't just cosmetic. Marcus found himself genuinely caring about the people who worked for him in a way he hadn't in years. He learned their names, asked about their families, and took a real interest in their professional development. The company culture began to shift from a competitive, status-driven environment to one based on collaboration and mutual respect. 6 months after the viral video, Marcus received an unexpected phone call. It was Mr. Harrison, the American investor, who had walked away from their deal after witnessing Marcus's humiliation. "I've been watching your company's progress," Mr. Harrison said. "I've seen the changes you've made, read about your volunteer work, and heard from people in the London business community about how you've handled this whole situation. I have to say I'm impressed." Marcus was stunned. "Mr. Harrison, I never expected to hear from you again after what happened." "Well, here's the thing," Mr. Harrison continued. "That video showed me who you were at your worst moment, but these past few months have shown me who you could become at your best. The man I'm seeing now, the one who learned from his mistakes and used them to become better. That's someone I might be interested in doing business with." The deal they eventually negotiated was different from the original proposal. It included provisions for charitable giving, employee development programs, and community involvement that reflected the values Marcus had rediscovered. But more importantly, for Marcus, it was a partnership with someone who respected him not for his wealth or status, but for his character and his commitment to doing business the right way. A year after the incident, Marcus found himself walking past Buckingham Palace. Again, this time, when he heard the familiar sound of military drums in the distance, he didn't feel irritation or impatience. Instead, he felt a deep respect for the tradition and discipline represented by the Queen's Guard. He joined the crowd of tourists and locals who had gathered to watch the ceremony, standing patiently as the soldiers marched past in their perfect formation. As Marcus watched the guards perform their ancient ritual with precision and dignity, he reflected on how much his life had changed. The viral video that had once been a source of shame had become, in an unexpected way, one of the best things that had ever happened to him. It had forced him to confront the person he had become and given him the opportunity to rediscover the person he wanted to be. Marcus's company was now more successful than ever, but success meant something different to him now. It wasn't just about profit margins and prestigious clients. It was about creating value for everyone involved, employees, customers, and the community as a whole. His team was more motivated, his clients were more loyal, and Marcus himself was happier than he had been in years. The young Marcus Wellington, who had grown up in Manchester, would have been proud of the man he had become after his fall from grace. He had learned that true success wasn't about commanding respect through wealth and status, but about earning it through humility, integrity, and genuine care for others. Sometimes, in quiet moments, Marcus still thought about that October morning, when his arrogance had collided with centuries of military tradition. He thought about the guard who had knocked him down without breaking stride, never knowing that he had done more than just remove an obstacle from his path. He had given a lost man the chance to find his way back to who he was supposed to be. The video of Marcus's encounter with the Queen's Guard still lived on the internet, a permanent reminder of his moment of greatest humiliation. But now when people asked him about it, Marcus didn't try to change the subject or make excuses. Instead, he told them honestly about how that experience had changed his life for the better, and how sometimes the most painful lessons are also the most valuable ones. Marcus had learned that respect couldn't be demanded or bought. It had to be earned through consistent actions and genuine character. He had discovered that true strength came not from believing you were above others, but from recognizing your connection to them. And perhaps most importantly, he had realized that the best version of himself wasn't the wealthy, successful businessman who thought the world owed him deference, but the humble, caring person who understood that everyone deserved to be treated with dignity and respect. In the end, the Queen's Guard had done exactly what they were trained to do. They had maintained order and upheld tradition without deviation. They had treated Marcus exactly the same way they would treat any other obstacle in their path, with efficient and impersonal removal. But in doing so, They had inadvertently given him something far more valuable than any business deal or status symbol. They had given him back his humanity.